Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever in the world you are connecting from today. And if that happens to be the US in the United States, well, happy Thanksgiving week to everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful week ahead with your loved ones and your family and friends, whoever it is you're going to be spending this time with. This month is November, but it's also Movember. And what that means is that this month of November is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And as you probably know, if you're part of this Hacking HR community, we have been sharing a lot of resources and data about the state of not only mental health in general, but in particular, men's mental health. And the numbers, the data, the statistics are truly heartbreaking, not just worrisome, and a reason to be very, very concerned, but they are truly heartbreaking. And the reason why we put this impromptu conversation, this event on November, is to make sure that we created a strong and urgent call to action for those of you men to seek help, to make sure that you are heard and supported, to know that you're not alone if you're struggling. And number two, for those of you who are tasked in your workplaces with creating the right culture and the right conditions for mental health to be front and center of your people strategy, to walk away with some insights, some ideas, some recommendations on how to make sure that your culture, your HR strategies, your business strategy account for all things mental health and particularly for men's mental health. So we're going to be together here for the next couple of hours. And as opposed to most of the events that we put together in this community, which generally are 1 hour sessions with 5, 6 panelists, this will be a very like a lightning round, so to speak. We're gonna be talking just for 25 minutes each session. We have 4 sessions today, and yesterday we had more. Of course, we had 3 sessions yesterday, so I'm hoping that you check out the videos from yesterday. But ultimately, what matters the most is that you walk away, number one, if you're a man struggling with your own mental health, that you walk away with inspiration and support to know that you can seek for help. And that's totally okay. It's not a weakness to seek for help. And it's not a weakness to be struggling or to be vulnerable. And if you are in the workplace tasked with, once again, creating this culture that is focused on mental health, that you walk away with some practical insights. Before I welcome our panel, I would love for all of you to please let us know where in the world you are connecting from. Just post it in the chat. Let us know anywhere, whatever you're connecting from, just post it in there. And if you have any questions during this conversation, if you have any insights, any reactions, any resources that you want to share with all of us in the community, so please make sure that you also post it in the chat. We're going to be kicking off with a conversation that is, the title of this conversation is From Isolation to Connection, Building Supportive Male Communities. And I'm going to welcome the panel before I just share some data that is, once again, truly heartbreaking about isolation in the workplace, particularly in the case of your male colleagues, or if you're a man, probably you're experiencing this, most likely you're experiencing this. So I am excited to welcome our panel today. I'm going to move them to the screen right now. So get ready, everybody. Alex, Sean, Wagner, Joseph, and Tristina. Hello, everybody. Good morning, wherever it is you're connecting from in the world. So excited to have you here. My only regret is that this is just 25 minutes. It should be, it should be a half a day to just scratch the surface, by the way. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And I'm going to ask you to please mute yourself, to have your microphones muted when you're not speaking, just to make sure that we avoid as much as possible any background noise. And let's kick off here. I want to ask you to please introduce yourselves to our audience. Just let us know, let everybody know more about you, who you are. But I also want to ask you a question. And whether in your capacity as a man or or as a person that probably belongs to a workplace, what I want to ask you is why is it so hard? Why has it been so hard for men to build communities, meaningful connections, meaningful communities at work? And how can we break that barrier or those barriers that prevent men from simply just building those powerful connections and meaningful connections at work. So if you can respond to those questions and introduce yourself, we're off to a fantastic start. So anybody who wants to go first, just unmute yourself, go ahead, and then we're going to be moving clockwise from there.
I
Alex,
can do
very easy. You're next to me in the screen.
It's on my screen. It looks like I'm first. Hi, everybody. My name is Alexandra Levitt. I'm a business and workplace author, speaker, consultant, and futurist. And what that means is I just look at trends that are percolating up through the marketplace, through society, through the business world, and try to make an educated determination about what has the greatest potential for disruption. And this topic is near and dear to my heart because I also have been a volunteer for 15 years for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So I've met with hundreds of people who have lost a loved one who has died by suicide, and therefore have a lot of kind of on the front lines experiences with families and friends and even workplace communities that have dealt with this kind of loss. And so trying to get to the issue before we have an event like this happen has been something that is really close to me and something I'm excited to talk about today.
Awesome, Alex. And how about the question? The question about how do we, why is it so hard for men to build communities at work, and how can we tear down those barriers that prevent them from doing so?
That's right. And I forgot about the question. Sorry. And I hope you'll all forgive me if I have a little bit of candor here, but I think everyone knows, especially the group assembled here today, that there is a stigma around mental health still. And in particular, I think men do not get a lot of positive reinforcement for bringing up these issues with people. I mean, everybody wants to think that they would do the right thing, that they would stand strong and support men when they're being vulnerable. But at the end of the day, this isn't often what happens. And I've seen these situations, unfortunately, firsthand, where somebody will say to me, well, he did say something, and I just kind of thought it was no big deal. So I think that they don't get positive reinforcement when they do. And that's really where we have to effect a change.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. And by the way, yesterday in one of the conversations, the lack of positive reinforcement came up, but also what came up was the how we shake off some comments that men may be putting forward that are a sign of their struggles, and we may think of them as a joke, or because they are coming from men, we may think of those comments as, man up, right? I mean, it's not a big deal, right? And that, of course, reinforces the stigma that exists in the workplace. And I'm hoping, of course, we talked a little bit about this today. So thank you, Alex, for that. Sean, please go ahead. I know you yourself have been very open about your own struggles and your own journey. So I'm excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much. So I'm Sean Harvey. I am the author of a book called Warrior Compassion: Unleashing the Healing Power of Men. I'm also the former head of personal transformation and well-being for Eileen Fisher, the fashion company, and now work with deepening connection and compassion among police departments, military, and in hypermasculine systems. Just to piggyback on what Alex just said, in terms of stigma, I think it's also access and availability. In terms of there's so many more resources for women and those beyond the binary than men in these conversations around how do we deepen connection. I think sometimes we are overcomplicating what men are really yearning for, which is deeper connection. And when we even look at the fact that the U.S. Surgeon General just said we are in an epidemic of loneliness. This is often the place that I often say in my book, first place to start is let's start building community among men where it's safe to actually engage. And what I like to say is to ugly cry in front of each other and be held by other men. Because I think oftentimes we go to women for nurturing and care, and it feels very different when men are offering that support to each other. And what does that look like?
Thank you, Sean. And I'm hoping we can share as well some strategies on how to do that as we have this conversation in the panel. So thank you. Wagner, hello.
Hi, everyone. It's so important to be here, and I'm glad that I'm here. Thank you. I'm Wagner Denuso. I started my career as a social worker after I immigrated from Brazil here in my early 20s. And I became a psychotherapist. I'm still a licensed psychotherapist, but I started my career in social work, and I did a lot of employee assistance programs as a counselor, then later as a director. And then that's how I merged into helping managers and leaders identify these issues and work with them. So my whole career in HR has been about leadership development, management development, all this. It's very hard to concisely say why, man, because it's not a single variable here. I think we have the difference between complicated and complex, right? Complicated, we
Mm.
have a manual. Even so it's complicated, we can do it. Complex is a different thing, because mental health in men is a complex issue, because we have prescribed roles that we play, there is expectations. But one single thing, and I love what Alexandra and Sean said, but one thing prior to all this, we need to work on our own assumptions about others, because
Mhm.
I see this over and over. Senior leaders don't get the attention personalized because we don't think they need it. It's always
Mhm.
the feeling that they don't need it, they know it, they don't need it, they're strong, they don't need it, look where they are. That's all a fallacy. And I think we need to start by really challenging our assumptions about
Mhm.
others. And I leave it with that, and then we can talk more about it. Thank you.
Oh, I love that, and I love the challenging our own assumptions, right? And wow, very very powerful. Thank you, Wagner, and I'm sure we're going to be talking more about that. Yusuf, please go ahead.
Hi, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So, I'm an associate professor at Yale School of Public Health, Department of Social Behavioral Sciences, and it's really great to join my fellow panelists to share. And what I've heard so far are all on point. And I think one thing I would offer to the discussion in terms of thinking about collectivity is the sociostructural aspects, right? So, oftentimes we want to think about representation, right, including how do we conceive of expanding the definition of workplace, particularly as we move away from being in the offices and moving out, right? So, considering even myself, using as an example, when we think about where do men go, sometimes for the first discussion or the first entry point to have those discussions, right? Most often it's actually outside of the workplace, right? So it's kind of how do we build workplaces that also acknowledge a larger system of places where resources are shared, where communities are built, and acknowledging having a space within the workplace, however that's defined as we move forward into the sort of post-pandemic, configurations. We want to be able to offer suggestions and including have our leaders value those spaces, right? Have the institutions that we're working value those spaces as well. So I think it's going to be important how the systems engage, because it's going to be some responsibility on the individual, some within the institutions, but more so changing the culture in organizations of how those transactions happen. So looking forward to sharing with the rest, and I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Joseph. And by the way, that's hard. It's hard to change culture, right? And it's. I'm not saying that we never paid much attention to mental health in general and men's mental health, but we really didn't that much before. And now it's become front and center for a lot of organizations because we have the data telling us work is breaking people, and to change the inertia of a system that has been going for for hundreds of years, that doesn't just happen overnight. So I'm hoping that we can share some insights that people feel are very tangible, small things that people feel are very tangible, because if we focus on changing the entire culture, man, we're going to be here forever, and it's going to feel the same as it felt the first day when we started the journey. So I really appreciate you bringing that holistic approach here. So thank you. And last but not least, in this round, Tristina, please go ahead.
Hi. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak on the panel today, and especially listening to each one of the panelists here. I'm just really impressed with some of the things that they're saying, and really I can align myself to those thoughts. But you asked us to introduce ourselves. I have been in senior leadership in HR for 20 plus years, and have recently pivoted to workforce development and helping those who are in need. And that need has grown significantly. We are seeing a lot of folks returning to the workforce, or trying to return to the workforce in different capacity, in their 40s and 50s, and so, in some ways beyond. And many of them are men, and we're seeing them struggling with the fact that maybe they had bigger dreams for themselves or hopes for themselves professionally, and they just didn't come to fruition. And so they're now in a workplace that sometimes is outpacing them, and they're feeling like they're not being supported the way that they need to be. And so one of my interests, of course, as an HR professional and in the workforce development space, is to identify opportunities where we can help men to build their mental health strengths, feel like they're connected, not feel lost in the shuffle. There's been a lot of focus on different groups right now, and I feel like we've told men for a long time to be strong and to, you should have it all together. You should have already accomplished all these amazing things, and so it's hard on men. There's a hard task for them, and so one of the things that I see a lot of HR individuals come to HR about is just the pressure of it all, just feeling a little bit lost and not understanding exactly what their resources are, and how they can articulate themselves in the workspace to say to their boss, I do need a hug. I do need somebody to support me. I do need to have some outlet where I can say, hey, I'm not sure exactly what direction I should take. So that's what I think are some of the biggest struggles for men in the workplace today.
Thank you, Tracina, and I appreciate that. And I didn't even think about, when I put together this conversation, I didn't even think about the people who maybe, later in their careers, and they are returning to work, and how it feels to be in a place where may not be the place where they wanted to be at this stage in their life, and the expectations from workplace, from society, from their own families. I value very much that you bring that up, because I think that in itself requires a specific conversation that serves that group of people. So thank you for that. So what we're going to do now, well, welcome all. Thank you so much for being here. What we're going to be doing now in the next 15 minutes for our panel, and again, I'm kicking myself on the teeth right now for just doing it so short. But what we're going to be doing now is I'm going to be asking you some questions. Just unmute yourself. Go ahead. It's going to be very much of a lightning round, so to speak. So, just add whatever insights you want to share about my next questions. But my next question is actually a two-part question, and it may take us the next 15 minutes. But so it is this: number one, what do men value in their connections with others at work? What are the top two things that a man would value when they create a meaningful connection with someone else at work? So that's part number one. And part number two is, how do we create safe organizations where men can actually seek out those meaningful connections and be vulnerable at the same time? And I say this because as a man, reaching out to somebody else to build a meaningful connection, that's already hard in itself. But if I am in a culture where being vulnerable and saying, like Tristina said before, I am struggling, I need a hug, I need support, that not only requires me actually seeking out that connection, but simultaneously being vulnerable about whatever may be happening for me. So what do men value in meaningful connections at work, and how do we create safe spaces where they can be vulnerable to seek out those meaningful connections? So this is a round of this is an open question for everybody. Just unmute yourself. Please go ahead.
Can I go first? And I think this might be a little provocative, but I'm beginning to think that we need to think about concrete ways in which we can put this in order. What I'm trying to say is this: I don't think the workplace is the place for men to express their emotions the way we think, because we are talking about a utopia that has not materialized. People are being laid off. People are being reduced to the common denominator, which is low wages, low level appointments. So we have to stop thinking that the workplace magically is going to change the way we identify talent, the way we express our biases, the way unconsciously we put people down, and the way unconsciously we prefer people who feel strong or appear to be stronger, because that's business. What I'm trying to put in place is, how might we create the conditions for people to access help? Employee assistance programs where people can truly reach something that might be experiential, might be something outside their risk of losing their jobs. Because I think this utopia, we have to stop talking about utopia, because the long-term journey in a company, for example, job security, all this is all utopia. So why don't we talk about concretely what we can do? And man, I do think what creates synergy is when man has a relationship that has mutual benefits and it's not based on interest. When I see somebody approaching me, really sharing the experience, that's when we start feeling safer, feeling building trust, and so forth. There's a whole gamut of things we can do to create the conditions for people to be respected for who they are and respect for where they are mentally, because mental health is a spectrum. But I leave it at that. But I don't think we have to keep talking about abstractions that will never happen. Sorry to say.
Wagner.
Oh, that's all right. Thank you. Tristina, please go ahead.
Sure. No, I totally agree with what Wagner is saying. My thoughts are always, when someone comes to me and they do want support, is to focus on them as an individual. And I think what we've done, especially recently, is we've treated people in a collective that everybody's problems are the same. In industry, period. Women's problems are the same. All women have the same problems. All LGBTQ have the same problems. All men have the same problems. And it's not true. Individuals, if you look at what their core strengths are and you start to play to those, you do see them as strong. You see them as strong in the areas that they actually shine, and not in areas where they may have deficiencies. And so I feel like, especially in the workplace, from a mental health perspective, if someone is having a mental health issue that is beyond just day-to-day stress that I think we're all facing all the time, right? We're all challenged in some way. Then that calls for outside assistance, and giving them that direction is helpful. I think when we expose to managers or leaders that an employee, be it male or female, but it's especially male, is struggling with mental health, we've now labeled them in a way that may not be repairable. And so it's important for us to, especially as HR practitioners, to look at it from the perspective of, how do I help this person heal externally, at the same time helping them to build and shine in the areas where they may be, exceptional in the workplace, so that they can survive long-term, as Wagner said, and that is not, there isn't this stigma that you've placed on the person about their mental health issues.
I would tend to agree with what both Tristina and Wagner said. I do think, and I see this all the time, that men and people in general don't even talk to their own families about these issues. So to expect them to talk about it openly with work colleagues is probably a little bit unrealistic. But what organizations can do tangibly is pay. Honestly, give money toward these ideas. An example that I came across recently, I have a grant with the National Institute of Mental Health to create a program for underrepresented minority employees who are getting laid off or have just been laid off, to get some very basic mental health support. And it's a nonprofit. These are like not large amounts of money, and organizations do not want to support these individuals. We're out there in the marketplace and it's just not happening. And to some degree, that is the level of person. I think that, Enrique, what you said at the very beginning about, senior level people having, issues, but we don't tend to think about other levels of people. Well, that has definitely been true in my experience, that frontline workers and contract workers and people who are kind of chronically underemployed or unemployed, these are the individuals who actually need mental health support the most. And we are not giving them, I think, what we could be giving them.
Yeah. Sean?
Yeah. So the two words that are coming up for me is authenticity and curiosity. I think to the point earlier, men are not a monolith. And I think right now, when we're talking about healthy masculinity, we're talking about these ideas of manhood, we're often saying there is a way, versus having the curiosity to ask men and give men the space to be able to reflect on who they are, to discover their own authenticity beyond their protective layers, and to create that safety for them to be able to do that. A lot of my work, I'm working with, police, military, I work with extremists. And one of the biggest things I do is create a non-threatening environment so they feel safe opening up.
Mm.
And I often say, if I can do it in those spaces, then we can do this in these organizations in ways that actually make sense. But I think the first is let men be in an inquiry to discover their own truth versus telling men what the truth should be, or moving from a patriarchal to a matriarchal agenda versus being like, what does it look like when you're balanced? What does it look like when you're integrated? What does it look like when you come into your full humanity? What then becomes possible? And I think men are craving this. They're just not given the invitation to be able to come into this.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so one of the things I would add to in the discussion is thinking about where we are. So Enrique mentioned earlier that these sort of challenges, they've been happening for a while, right? It only become much more visible as we just came through the height of the pandemic and when mental health sort of rose to the forefront in the public consciousness, right? So the challenge is that where do we go in the next couple of years, right? Are we addressing the acute issue right now with the population who definitely needs help right now? But I also want to encourage us to think about systems that will be sustainable. So what do I mean by that, right? So in the case of, well, if you look at some of the things that men value, for instance, so for me, as in my organization, right, I just considering my sort of intersection as a man, as a Caribbean person, as a Black person, right, I also identify with lived experience, the opportunity to be able to go to someone who may not necessarily look exactly like me, but who I can perhaps identify with, right? So when I look around within my organization, who am I seeing? Am I seeing that first point of contact, right? So while we attend to the acute sort of things that we need to change, definitely getting the right to pay for the support for the app, as Alex mentioned, as Tracina mentioned, getting the support. We need to address those immediate things that are happening, right? But and how do we also kind of think about long term? Because as mentioned, the pandemic has been here for a while. Mental health crises, if you look at the trend data, have been here for a while, is expanding. So we also want to think as well in terms of how do we create the representativeness within our organizations so that they are sort of these sort of first point of contact individuals who then may be the buttress person. In the meantime, we are getting those professional resources, right? So just thinking many of our organizations have the apps and have the types of employee assistance programs, but they may not be the first point of contact. So I do think that we need to be careful in terms of how we also provide solutions that are sustainable. And so this is the one thing I think would be a delicate balance as well.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. And I'm going to ask you one last question, which we literally have like 2 minutes for this last question, but so it's going to be like probably one liner for an answer. But for people individually, I'm a true believer in thinking big and acting small, meaning, yes, I want to build a workplace. I want to build societies where we care for people's mental health and we do all the good things that we need to do. But that doesn't mean anything if I am not acting aligned with that. So thinking big, acting small, for everybody who's listening out there right now, 1 or 2 actions, whether they are individual contributors in their organization, whether they are in HR or they are senior leaders, whatever it is, 1 or 2 actions that they can get behind, that they can start implementing right now to help build more meaningful connections, whether it is at work and, to Wagner's point, in society in general. 1 or 2 actions that they can do right now. So this is going to be a one-liner answer for the 2 minutes that we have available. So Alex, I see you unmuting yourself, so please go ahead.
Model vulnerability, and this doesn't have to be a huge emotional outburst, but especially senior leaders who can volunteer information in a diplomatic, calm way about what they're going through, I think makes a lot of difference. Other people feel safe to do so.
Thank you. Sean, do you want to go next?
Sure. I would say start to explore creating men's well-being circles, which are different than ERGs, to be able to have the space for men to be able to start having the vulnerability and the real conversations.
Thank you. Wagner?
I think it's simple, this one. Creating space to reflect. I think if the organizations can keep mindful minutes before meetings where everybody just breathes, I think at least you give a moment for people to start assessing how they are, because right now, I don't even think that we have time to assess that.
Thank you, Wagner. Joseph?
Thanks. So two things. I would say one, make the call, whether that's someone who you just want to check in on. And then secondly, don't be afraid to leverage your power. We also want to recognize that there are differences within organizations of who can go to whom, right? So if you have that power to act on behalf of someone else, please do so as well.
Thank you. Last but not least, again in this round, I'm sorry, Trisina, that you were last in the first and the last round.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
But not least,
I mean,
never least.
Never least. There you go. I think number one is do all the things that these panelists have said, because they're really key. Just taking care of each other, creating spaces, having ERG groups, having expansive groups, as Sean spoke to, and what Alexander spoke to as well. But in the end, just be kind. Just be kind to one another. If you can be kind and go beyond what you see and think about how the other person may actually be feeling inside, I think it'll help us all a little bit. And on that, I'll end there. Thanks again, Enrique.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex, Sean, Wagner, Joseph, and Trisina for joining this conversation. Too fast for my liking, but hey, we're gonna have to do it again probably next year because this conversation will probably never end. So thank you so much. I'm gonna let you go now to welcome our next panel. Thank you. You all have a wonderful day. So everybody, I am gonna be welcoming our next panelist in a second. This, of course, you know, all the conversations that we have today, it's 4 of them, 25 minutes each one, and we connected them not only to the topic of Men's Mental Health Awareness Month and an urgent call to action for men's mental health, but all the topics are connected. So this next conversation is about creating safe spaces in life and work. And we want to make sure that we talk about how to foster safe spaces for men's emotional and mental well-being. So I'm going to be welcoming our panelists right now. So everybody get ready. Mary, Stephanie, Jason, and Summer. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the time it is for you today. Thank you so much for being here. Very excited about having you. And I am going to ask you a favor. If you can keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking, that way we avoid as much as possible any background noise. This, for some reason, ended up being it's going to be a 25-minute conversation, which I am totally regretting right now because I'm having to cut short everything. So let's just dive right into the topic. And I'm going to piggyback on the last kind of like conversation that we had in the previous panel. I'm going to ask you to please introduce yourself. So if you want to say a couple of things to the audience, but also if you can respond to this question, what can we do to create safe spaces at work to have vulnerable conversations about mental health, particularly men's mental health? So what can we do? Very tactical and practical insights, if you may, to create safe spaces at work where people can be vulnerable and they can feel and they know that they can talk about, perhaps their struggles and whatever else related to mental health. So if you can do that together with your introduction, we are going to be off to a wonderful start. So anybody, please kick us off, and then we move clockwise from there.
I'll go ahead and
Stephanie,
jump in.
Ahead. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Enrique. It's such a pleasure to have this conversation. My name's Stephanie Lemick. I'm a former HR executive turned consultant and founder of an organization called the Wounded Workforce, and we are focused on building trauma-informed workplaces. And to answer your question, I would say the first thing I think organizations can do is build awareness and understanding as it relates to the prevalence of trauma and traumatic experiences in our adult population and our whole population, including our workplaces.
Thank you. Absolutely. I'm going to welcome our next other panelist, Melissa. I don't see you there. Sorry, everybody. You're somewhere in there. You're coming through. I'm going to have your microphone muted for now, Melissa, just in case. Jason, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's Jason Rosoli. I've been in HR, labor relations, being an HR business partner for over 25 years. And what I would say is making sure that policies are reflective of the needs, and benefits structures within companies are reflective of the needs, but not just, making sure that there's employee resource groups, EAP programs, policies that allow for work-life balance and time off when needed, especially to support folks that are, have issues at the workplace that regarding mental health and awarenesses of such, but also just policies that reflect an open door policy, feedback channels, both in person and anonymous. That allow for anonymity, like I said, and then also just be supportive of resources that are outside of the typical workplace, such as our resource groups that are related to those individuals, whether or not it be new fathers, those that are reentering from the military, or other types of scenarios that might be going on within their lives.
Thank you, Jason. Summer.
Hi, Summer Baruth. I work with ACOM. I have also been in HR in some way, shape, or form, or people and culture roles for over 20 years. I feel like this is a conversation that we thought would probably come to light at some point, right? Because there's always such a focus on all the other demographics within our organizations. And so a lot of times I feel like the men in our organizations get lost. And so I think, from a perspective of how do you create the safe spaces, you can have lots of policies. To Jason's point, you can make sure that those are really being inclusive of that population. But at the same time, I think there's that awareness piece that's kind of like that steady drumbeat throughout the organization, that it's okay, and finding your people and finding like that you can be more transparent. And that starts with our leadership, and really thinking about how we talk about those programs. Because a lot of times you may find within your organization, people don't understand how their struggle right now equates to them going to use their EAP service and how it might assist them. And so I think just trying to really give real life examples and being transparent when people are using those kind of resources is really helpful.
Thank you. Mary?
I agree with around the policies and the procedures and creating that awareness. But I think the other piece is, having senior leaders really model what vulnerability looks like, because if we're doing it right, we're going to create awareness. We're going to have like these little communities that we're going to build, right? But if we're not seeing that, really being modeled, I think about it like just like with inclusive leadership, you want to see your leaders emulating that kind of thing. I think we have to do that as well. But I think we have to be really mindful that it's a comprehensive approach, and we might be at this for a while before we see anything. We really are working against some long organizations or systematic ways of thinking around gender and men in the workplace. That's really hard to not only identify, but to create an awareness, and then this path along the way. So I think we have to constantly be evolving ourselves. And then I would say the last piece we have to do is we have to listen. I think we have to think about our employee engagement surveys. I don't know if, some companies do well-being surveys, but we need to look at the data about the unique experiences of all of our employees, but specifically around men. I think they're just forgotten, way too much. But, this mental health piece and men is just so complex, and it's hard for us to talk about because there's just this notion that they have to be they've got to handle it all, or we always hear just man up and do what needs to be done. I think we put them in a really unfair position to then be vulnerable or to ask for that help when they really need it.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. We're going to be talking a little bit about that. And Melissa, what we're doing now is just quick intro, and we are responding to the question of one or two things that people can do at work to create safe spaces for men to be vulnerable. So if you want to, I can give you a second if you want to think about that, by the way.
Yes, no, well, thank you. Apologies for joining late. I had some technical difficulties, so I'm joining via phone. I'm Melissa Schwartzman, a Chief People Officer, HR Executive, but also a licensed clinical social worker. So the mental health piece is very near and dear to my heart. I have both the combination of being in the workplace and understanding it, but also the behavioral background. So I think listening to all of you, you have touched on all very salient points. I think it's really hard to get to the root of it, though, because especially from the masculine point of view, it really is hard for men because traditionally, right, before women have really become dual working families, they've always been kind of the breadwinners. And so with a lot of the layoffs that have been going around, right, it's a lot of pressure for men to have been that role in the workplace, right? And now people traditionally have not had that role and not been able to have that income for their family. But in terms of what workplaces can do, I think is just making sure that people understand that there are roles that men are playing that are not the same that they've always been, and being able to allow for that. I think it's also now men are having women as bosses and supervisors. That's a whole new thing to be looking at. So I think it's just really looking at giving support in the workplace. Having manager training, I think, is also important, right? Really understanding what leadership looks like versus being a manager, because they're not always the same thing. And I think somebody brought up the employee assistance program. I think that's important too, because those are things that go on behind the scenes that aren't as public, and people can kind of get help in private and also explain workplace issues that are going on. So I think it's incumbent upon the workplace to really give programs and make them more prevalent and aware. And I think also things are becoming more open with benefits that are being rolled out too. So there's more things that are available. So
Yeah.
it helps.
Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you all. Thank you for being here in this lightning round of a conversation, because I don't know why I did this for 25 minutes. It should have been hours, but anyway, let's try to do get as much as possible out of the conversation. But let me ask you this: because we have been sharing so much about men's mental health in the workplace, and people ask, like, well, why is it that some of these things are happening only to men, or more overwhelmingly to men than to women? And of course, that made me go and find out, even though this is a very complex issue and there are many underlying conditions that are very different for each group, for each man, for each country, and whatever it is, there are some kind of like common answers, right? And one of them is this ability. I don't know if it's necessarily an ability or just openness and vulnerability for women to create groups to talk about what they may be struggling with and going through. And that's not true for most men. And it's not true for most men, even in their own families, where we don't even talk, by the way, I'm including myself in there. We don't even talk about what goes on in our minds, what we're struggling with, the kind of help that we need, because we feel, I don't know, Jason, I'm going to say it, but we may feel as a failure when we do that, right? If we say openly, I'm struggling, the immediate connection in my brain, at least, is I feel like a failure if I ever say that I need help, or that I don't know how to do something, or that I, in whatever ways, I'm being vulnerable. So the big question is, how do we encourage men? Number one, in the direction of this being okay, that we reinforce the message that not being okay is okay, and that seeking help and not having all the answers, struggling, are not signs of weakness. They are rather a sign of just being a human being, and things that we all deal with. And so, number one, how do we encourage men to do that, right? To know that this is okay, when these things happen. And number two, to seek help, to ask others and say, hey, I don't know how to do this. I'm struggling. Or, you know what? I need some time because I'm lost, whatever. Or I feel like a failure just because I don't know how to do this. So how do we create that encouragement for men? So anyway, open question for anybody who wants to just jump in and add your thoughts here. Jason, I saw you unmuting yourself there.
Well, normally we're ladies first, but we're talking about guys. So
we're talking about men.
I'm going to take the spotlight here, right? So, now, honestly, I think it's important. Two things. One, that companies facilitate an environment where it's easy for a man who's suffering, whether or not it's, again, various things that are going on in life. Men struggle mostly, I think, from my experience, not just also about being, a provider, but just being a father, right? How to be a dad. So, I have some experience and been lucky and fortunate enough. My brother owns a company that's called High Speed Daddy. I'm not trying to plug him, but it wasn't just about that. It was about him having a forum for men to connect and talk about life as a father, and it's High Speed Daddy, provide, protect, and connect. And, because fathers want to be a provider, they want to be a protector, but they don't, but there's always that lack of connection. All right. So there's plenty of other ones, the Dad Edge, the Iron Council, the Epic Dad Company, Superhuman Fathers, Rising Fathers. Like, these are all great resource groups for new fathers to be a part of. How awesome would that be if companies were then allowing, and promoting those types of forums and venues for new fathers within the company to go and be a part of. So it's not always that the company itself has to have this resource group within. They just need to make sure there's an awareness and help promote these healthy causes that are external. And there's obviously a lot of other ones out there as well that deal with, the Men's Health Network, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and Heads Up Guys, the Good Men Project. There's lots of these forums and resources that are out there that they just have to be promoted and help facilitate and make sure that, that men within the workplace know there's resources out there. Okay.
Yeah.
And then from the other aspect is just the training aspect of knowing how to identify when someone is struggling at work. Okay. It doesn't have to be a layoff situation. And yes, that's a tough one for a man to deal with, right? Because they do feel like they're the provider. They do feel like they have to be contributing to society and the family and keep that statuous figure of themselves but again, just making sure that within the company that they're able to identify, when someone is struggling, whether it is a man or a woman that's struggling, okay, and then be able to provide them those connections to get help for whatever reason they might be struggling with. Yeah. I know I spoke a lot. Sorry.
Oh, thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. Thank you. We go with Stephanie and then Mary.
Perfect. I love what you said, Jason. And, I think perhaps this is an interesting take, but it's one I feel pretty strongly about. I think men's mental health is an overlooked aspect of the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation we've been having for many years. And it is, let's, peel it back a little bit. Men have been harmed by the systems in place that have, oppressed other people as well. And one of the ways they've been harmed is kind of the expectations that they've had put on them about not talking about their feelings, about not talking about their emotions, about not talking about vulnerability, about kind of building all of these things up as in who they are supposed to be. And to me, that's, historical generational trauma in some cases showing up for men and showing up for a lot of men. I talked earlier about the prevalence of trauma in our society. Over 70% of adults self-identify as having traumatic experiences. And when you peel back that number more, that number is actually higher for men than it is for women. And so I really think understanding and addressing this as is what it really is another aspect of our history that has done harm, I think is really helpful. And I think it helps call men into that conversation in a different way and is a little bit more inclusive.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I would say trauma-informed workplaces are all about building processes and culture that support everyone, whether or not they're raising their hand. So I think thinking about your processes, your culture, how you're doing things in a way that supports mental health is really important as well. So, the truth is sometimes folks aren't going to raise their hand and ask for help. So creating avenues where you're able to support them without the ask, I think is also very valuable.
Oh, I love that. And there's something that I want to add that maybe, Mary, I know you would appreciate this and probably comment on it, which is the intersectionality of the conversation about men's mental health, right? And I mentioned this because Stephanie, you made me think about how mental health illnesses are, prevalent, among everybody, of course, but particularly men. And when you peel that onion even more, you find that the younger generations are significantly struggling. We actually posted today in the community something about loneliness in Gen Zers, and it's amazing how Gen Zers now, people that are, in their mid-20s or something, they are now talking about something along the lines of 90% of them saying we are struggling. We are struggling, and loneliness is one of the struggles that we have, right? So it's important to talk about that in the context, and I appreciate you for saying it, of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mary, comment on my previous question and this new added comment here.
You would have thought we had this all set up because it really goes into the next point that I wanted to make was, that intersection of mental health and culture. That is such a prevalent factor, whether it's in the workplace or back home with your families. culture plays such a large role in how we talk about mental health, or maybe how we not talk about it. And I think that's the part where it's a little dangerous for us. I think COVID really opened up, or maybe just gave us a new lens on mental health that we probably would have never gotten to this quickly. I always look at that as a silver lining of all of that stuff that we went through, because mental health is such at the forefront. And, mental health doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what your background is, your culture, what your experience has been. Those things really are tough to tackle when you add that lens of equity, inclusion, and culture. And while we know that these conversations probably aren't happening as much back home, they're really not happening at work. And so I love what Jason had to say about creating these safety nets. One of the things we discovered this year, we launched ERGs around March earlier this year, and caregiver was one of the ERGs. I called it my breakout ERG because we thought we were going to launch it later, but it was top. It was our top 2. What we're finding is that a majority of our members are caregivers of children under the age of 12. But when we looked at some of the survey, we found that men were starting to raise their hand very quietly. It was a little bit of a raise of a hand, but we realized this is something we really need to focus on. So we're looking at how do we create some safe stories around our membership base who happen to be men, who might also be a father, or maybe they're just a caregiver for an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent, whoever. And I think we have to expose that vulnerability and show that there's empathy and there's a safe place for that. It's not going to happen overnight, but you start creating this different safe spaces and this awareness. I think we're going to get somewhere, but it really is a long journey that we're ahead of that we may not realize.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Summer and then Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things I want to jump on was the loneliness piece. So while I see it a lot in the Gen Zers that live in my household, right? Like everything's on the phone. I also have worked with a lot of executives over 20 years, right? And to the point of working with them day in, day out and really having straight conversations. What I find more with the male leaders I've worked with over time, especially in the C-suite, loneliness sets in really, really quickly. And if they don't find that space of where they can be transparent, for some it might be at home and it's with their family, for some it might be a colleague or a peer outside the industry. It's a really hard thing to watch when you start to kind of see the signs, and as an employee you're like, what can I do to help? But I know you're not going to talk to me, but I feel like you need to. So I think having a better support system for our leaders is also just as important as the rest of our company, right? Because they're a lot of times making choices on behalf of our people in our companies. And then they're probably just as burnout. And it came up in a conference I was at last week where it was a C-suite sitting around a table talking about people experience and how do we provide better psychological safety moments and things like that for our people. And one of the men raised his hand. He's like, can we all just admit that we're all burnout? All of us. And that's a brave thing in a room of people you don't really know. And, so I thought it made me think about this conversation a lot. And so the other piece I would say is if you're a global organization, you have to really look at it from a regional and cultural perspective as well. We're in, over 45 countries. And so that makes for a very different kind of thought process and how we're thinking about our ERGs and our different groups. And really having to be mindful of that. It's not one size fits all. It's definitely not even one size fits most. And so it's really from a global perspective, what well-being programs can we have into place? But what are the conversations our managers are having? Many of our teams are global in nature across the board. And so it might be very simple and an easier conversation for a team that's predominantly American, but they may have a few people that are Asia, India, other, in other cultures of the world, where those conversations make them very uncomfortable. And so it's, it's really difficult for our managers sometimes. And so that's kind of where I have a lot of my thought processes going all the time of how can we create that better? Because I see it show up in some of my own employees, right? So it can be a challenge.
Yeah. Thank you, Summer. I appreciate that. And Melissa?
Yes. Well, I think everyone made so many valid comments. To kind of summarize it and thread it through, I think it all comes down to really making sure everything is kind of consistent with the values of the company. So that comes back to what Jason was saying, right? About making sure if we're saying that our values are about, having integrity and about having strength. And then we're also saying as a leadership team, right, that we really value our employees and our employees are our greatest assets. But that if we're not doing all these things that we're saying around the table, which is including it on our DEI and making sure that we're supporting our employees, none of these things are really having any continuity. So I think making sure that these programs are really being shown and actually being put into practice with our employees and from the top down and also from the bottom up, right? So it has to be all the way through. But I think what I'm hearing and really thinking about is making things a little bit more normalized, right? So when we do like employee orientations or we talk about programs or managers are meeting with their teams, like we put a little bit more out there about being more human, right? And putting that there like, wow, it's really okay. Like it's stressful to be a caregiver and the male perspective, and people can give like real examples that they're having, or when we do trainings that we have and we add like vignettes that we can actually show that, and in this case we're talking about males today, that a male is like actually like, wow, it's really hard to be, a dad and a husband and an executive, or a dad and a husband and a middle line manager, or dad and husband, or somebody who's a business support person. And we can actually show these examples. So we're showing this without having somebody, like we said, raise their hand and say, I'm in this situation. We're actually showing that this exists for people. People can, it's relatable. Wow, I recognize myself in this person. And this actually helps with employee engagement because people want to be where people like themselves are. And also then this is a way where you can actually show then the programs that you have for people and where they just saw, wow, this is like me. Now, what can I do to get the support? Where can I go? And then, work on something for myself. So I think that just ties together basically normalizing things, the continuity, putting in our programs and tying things together for employees.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you, everybody. I know this was a very quick panel. Again, total regret, but I'm going to ask you one last question to be responded with, a couple of liners, to walk away with. But I want to ask you this. What's your message to I believe in the power of one. I believe in the power of people making change with their own actions. They may not change the world, but maybe they change their relationship with just the one person that needs that change at that very moment. So my question to all of you is, what can one or two things that people individually can do? I mean, I'm putting myself in the place of somebody who says, I'm not a boss in this company. I don't have power in the company. I don't even influence large groups of people. The culture in this organization won't change. Whatever that is, but maybe in their minds it is, I want to do something, because maybe I see one person is struggling and I can see the signs, but I don't know what to do. One or two things that person individually can do to create a safer organization for mental health, particularly for men. And if you can get very practical here, that would be fantastic. So one liner for the 2 minutes that we have left in this panel. So anybody, please go ahead and then we take it from there. Summer, I see you ready there.
Yeah, I'll start. So I think just in your day-to-day interactions with your peers and with your teams, just as an individual and how you're contributing, being vulnerable and being a good listener.
Thank you. Melissa, do you want to go next?
Sure. I was just going to say, I think really just listening and looking out for signs. And if you see somebody is struggling, really take the extra time to just show that you care and remind them that, you're here to support them.
Thank you. Mary?
I would say check on your people. It's so hard to really determine where someone might be, especially in this remote first world, but call and check on your people, be kind. We just have no idea what people are going through. And I think if we show some of that empathy, if we can usually suspect when something's not quite right with some of our teammates, I would just ask. I'd rather someone ask than not know. I know there were times where I was asked if I was okay and I wasn't. And it really made a difference to know that someone cared. And I think right now we need a lot of that.
Yeah. Thank you. Stephanie?
I would say practice radical acceptance of others and of yourself.
Love that. Jason?
These points are all excellent. You stole all my ideas, guys. No. But I think is doing the work up front proactively that sets the stage for a discussion that might be needed in the future. Again, treat someone as you wish to be treated as the golden rule, which I always practice. And lastly, provide that safe environment. So that way, when that discussion or something does come to light, that someone feels comfortable, sharing with the understanding that we'll get through this together because we're one team with one mission and one journey. So, provide that safe environments for somebody, whether or not it's something that they're experiencing within the workplace or something outside of the workplace. Show a genuine interest in that person.
Thank you, Jason. And I want to add one of my own, which is that it is true that you can make a difference in somebody's lives with your actions, your behaviors, your words in a positive direction, but you can also make an impact, you can also have a negative impact in somebody's lives if you don't care for what you're saying and the way you're addressing these issues. Mental health stigma is not a workplace saying, we don't talk about mental health here. It is somebody making an off remark about, somebody's comment or somebody just making a joke out of a condition that you shouldn't be making a joke about. So my encouragement to people is just educate yourself about even the words that you can use, the nomenclature, what's acceptable. And, listening means, making sure that you're not making jokes or, off remarks when people are expressing themselves to you. So Mary, Stephanie, Jason, Summer, Melissa, thank you so much for being part of this panel, this 20-minute panel, by the way. So pretty quickly, I'm going to let you go now to welcome our next panelist for our next session. Thank you so much. And you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm going to be welcoming our next panel now, everybody. I'll tell you in a second what it is. Whoops. All right. I'm welcoming everybody right now. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. This next conversation for everybody, we're going to be talking about redefining the code, dismantling toxic masculinity, and another conversation part of this series that we have going on today around men's mental health. And I am hoping that we, again, continue to have a quick conversation with, very practical takeaways during this chat. What I'm going to ask you is, I'm going to ask everybody who's connected online. I know a lot of you have been connected now for an hour and a half or an hour plus. Please let us know if you have any questions, if you have any comments. Please let us know where you're connecting from. Just post it in the chat. It would be awesome to know where everybody is. And again, these conversations are very fast, 20 plus minutes with each panel. We have this session, and then we have the last one coming up right after this. So hello, everybody. Rusty, I'm going to begin with you to please ask you to introduce yourself, and we're going to be moving clockwise from there. So to make it quickly, so please introduce yourself. And I want to ask you, when we talk about toxic masculinity, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so I'm Rusty Gaylord. I live in the Silicon Valley area in California, and I'm an executive coach. I work with leaders to set clear, ambitious goals and be bold in achieving them. To me, toxic masculinity is, I don't have a great definition for it, but I think we all know it when we see it, right? It's this leaning overly into kind of a power dynamic, right? Trying to have power over other people. I'm actually a real believer in personal power and being a powerful leader, but that's not power over other people. That's about being able to clearly articulate and express what it is that you stand for, and then follow that up with actions and actually show up as a leader that is valued and principled. So looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Ross, and welcome to the panel. Angela, same question, if you can introduce yourself too.
Darn, I wish I'd gone first because Rusty took my definition. Angela Champ. I'm an HR executive and the author of The Squiggly Line Career. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm on the traditional lands of the Musqueam, Semiahmoo, and Kwantlen people. Grateful to be here. Similar to what Rusty said, toxic masculinity is power over people and an over-indexed show of anger and aggression, which can make other people, including themselves, feel unsafe, whether it's in the workplace or in the home place.
Thank you, Angela. And I'm hoping that we talk more about how to dismantle that, right? Julia, hello, welcome.
Hi, my name is Dr. Julia DeGangi. I'm in Chicago. I am a neuropsychologist, which means I'm a clinical psychologist with specialized expertise in the brain. And I just wrote Energy Rising. A lot of my work focuses on the relationship between leadership, emotional pain, and emotional power. And I would say, so first of all, I thought that Rusty and Angela gave phenomenal definitions. If you ask me what toxic masculinity is, I would have a very simple answer. It is the idea of men who are relationally dangerous.
Wow. Well, we're going to dig deeper into what that means at work and how to dismantle that. When I talk about, and I have shared a lot of this on my social media before, when I talk about toxic masculinity, there can be some sort of a blurry definition of what that is, right? Blurry lines sometimes. And it's interesting that when I talk about it, men feel attacked. They feel, I'm not saying all men, but a lot of men do feel attacked when we talk about toxic masculinity and when we talk about the traits of somebody whose toxicity it's evident. And it is hard to understand that sometimes you don't have to be an evil person to be necessarily to have those traits of toxic masculinity. You can have something as simple as thinking that you have to have it all together, that you can't make mistakes, that you can't fail, or that asking for help or struggling means that you're a failure, or that seeking help means and having that vulnerability means that you're less of a man. So even those traits that we try to hide with behaviors, with actions, which creates a huge toll on us, that is toxic masculinity. So how do we dismantle that, right? How do we dismantle something that is not just necessarily being evil as a person, but on the other hand, are conditions that actually society, ourselves, but also everybody around us expect from us. People generally have that expectation that men should not fail, or they have to have it all together, or they have to be strong, that a man crying is not a real man. How do we even dismantle that when those conditions are so ingrained in the way we behave, but also in what we expect from men? Open question to anybody here.
I'll go ahead. So
Please go ahead. Yeah.
I think the way that we dismantle this is by understanding nervous systems and understanding how the brain really works. So I am totally on fire for the brain. First of all, it's fascinating. But second of all, I think it is such an instrument of healing. So you're exactly right. There's this idea that, like, whenever we even talk about this, there can be sort of this defensiveness. I think the more we understand how brains operate and how realities are constructed, I think it calms people down. So this idea of toxic masculinity is really this idea, I think it's an archetype, right? So if there's this idea that men can be dangerous, the opposite of that would be this idea that men can be safe. But there's always this implicit question that never gets fully asked or fully answered. And the question is, safe to whom? Now, the initial point of the conversation is always this kind of assumption, and it's often not overtly said, that he should be safe to others, that he would be psychologically safe to others in all the ways that we can be psychologically safe or psychologically dangerous. But here is the piece. And this is such a big piece. I think it's so transformative. I think it gets everybody to relax. Emotions are a currency. Okay, so we transact emotions the way we transact time as a currency, the way we sort of transact money. Well, the idea that I could be, safe to other people when I'm not safe inside of myself is neurologically impossible. Right? So how in the world can we set up this construct where men are supposed to be safe when we've also set up an equally powerful construct where men are told to be dangerous to themselves. The whole idea when people say be a man, what it actually means is stop having emotion. So the idea of, well, you might as well tell yourself to inhale and never exhale. Like emotions are not moralistic. They are literally neurologic zings of energy that then influence behavior. So there needs to be this kind of neurobiological reckoning with, number one, what emotions are, and then how other people experience us as safe. No one is going to experience us as safe, either men or women, if we are not first safe to ourselves.
Yeah.
I agree so much with what Julia is saying. I find myself nodding and making notes. And on top of what she said, one of the challenges is that the only emotion we've allowed men to acknowledge is anger.
Yeah.
So, we are human beings, and in the full context of human beings, we experience a spectrum of emotions, but the only one that we acknowledge or allow men to express or think that they can express is anger. And so to your question, Enrique, how do we take that down? And to build on what Julia was saying, if we start by talking at the societal level, yes, stop saying things like be a man, suck it up, boys don't cry. Boys do cry and should cry, but also at the organizational level and at the individual level. So allowing and giving them the vocabulary to express what they're feeling, and in the spectrum of it. I mean, even anger has a spectrum. Are you annoyed or are you enraged? That's a spectrum. Which one are you? Giving them the language to be able to express what they're actually feeling and making it okay. And at a societal level, at an individual level, family level, organizational level, not mocking people, not shaming them, not ostracizing them for expressing and naming those emotions. I really believe that building on humans' emotional intelligence and being able to name your emotions, that self-awareness, is a good first step in order to remove that.
Thank you, Angela. And I will ask soon about self-awareness, by the way. So get ready for the question that is coming. Rusty, please go ahead.
Well, I agree with everything that's being said, and I think that one of the challenges we face in this particular topic is it is very embedded in our culture, right? This idea of just even the sayings, be a man, suck it up, that kind of thing. So sure, would it be great to change our culture? Absolutely. But that's a big task. And I'm very much about what can you do as an individual? How can you actually make a difference individually as a person in this respect? And I just want to share a couple of things. Number one is I truly believe that emotions are information and powerful. What you do with them, of course, matters. It's totally fine to be angry. How you handle that anger, how you interact with someone based on that, that's where it's really important to be thoughtful about that. It's totally fine for me to say to anybody, look, I'm really angry. I don't like the way you handled that thing. It's totally different for me to stand up and threaten them and challenge them to a fight or something like that. Those are very different things, but we see that kind of thing on social media. So number one is, what are you doing as an individual to get to know your different emotions and then learn to handle them without them hijacking you? So that's the first part. And one of the paths to do that, I mean, you mentioned self-awareness, so we can get more into that. But the other path to do that is there's a lot of research around self-compassion. And self-compassion is it's a pretty well documented path to be able to hold an emotion, to be able to have an emotion without it taking you over. And so there's steps you can take all the way from just, breathing exercises, that kind of thing, to kind of slow down your immediate emotional response. But then to recognize that this is part of being a person. This is part of being alive. And when you're alive, you have emotions, you bump into other people, you have differences of opinion. All that stuff is fine and normal. But you have to learn to acknowledge it rather than suppress it so that you can do something with it and do something productive with it.
Yeah. And the question for me is, or for us, is whether, first of all, whether we even acknowledge that there are more emotions other than anger. And number two, whether we allow ourselves to actually, if we know that there are many more emotions that besides anger and maybe, love for our family and friends and whatnot, right? If we allow ourselves to feel anything in that spectrum, which sometimes I think men fail to, right? And perhaps because we don't have the proper words, or perhaps because we feel that it's a failure of our masculinity to acknowledge that we have an emotion that doesn't feel to be right for a man. So I'm going to connect that to my question about self-awareness. To dismantle anything in the world, you first have to acknowledge that there's something to be dismantled. And I'm not necessarily sure that men have yet, as an entire gender, maybe some people individually, but as a gender, I don't think we have yet acknowledged that there is something wrong, and that therefore there's something that needs to be dismantled, because we are, I don't know about you, Rossi, I think, but there's an upbringing where we are bombarded by these messages of, boys don't cry, men, show up, suck it up, man up, or whatever it is. So that has become so normal in our lives that it's really hard to say, yeah, it was normal, but it's not normal, and it shouldn't be that way. So how do we create that level of self-awareness when we don't know that we even have to be aware about something, or if we are aware about that something, we may get defensive because that's the way things have always been, right? So how do we create that self-awareness? Please just go ahead and unmute yourself. Oh,
well, I'm going to say that, I think that it is unreasonable to expect a society as a whole to be aware of something they find inherently disgusting. So if I think that my emotions, my tender emotions, my fear, my own feelings of embarrassment or inadequacy or humiliation are sort of categorically disgusting, it's unreasonable based on how nervous systems are wired to engage with that. And this is why I think sort of the neurology of talking about our lives and our relationships is actually so healing and so transformative. So I think we already start to shift the conversation when we start to recognize that pain, so feelings of fear, feelings of inadequacy, feelings of embarrassment, feelings of awkwardness, feelings of irritation, are quite literally neurologic energy. So just like we have hunger pains, just like we have digestion processes, just like we sleep. I mean, I am totally not here. I'm not even saying emotions are good. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying they're neurological. Like, no one's at war with gravity. Okay. So I think becomes something kind of spacious and calming about saying, okay, so emotions are an energy. And here's the thing, you don't even have to take it from a neuropsychologist. Let's look at physicists. The physicists taught us that energy cannot be destroyed. It can't be created, or it can be destroyed. It can only be transformed. Well, here's the idea. Okay. And this is such a big piece, I think, of the transformation. When the energy of pain is in my nervous system, when fear is there, when, insufficient, I mean, you going on and on, there's a million synonyms for these things. When it is there and it is not processed internally, it will be externalized. This is the physics of emotion. Okay. So people love to say emotions are so confusing and so overwhelming. This could not be further from the truth. Emotions are the most primitive, universal form of human communication. They're quite simple, actually. So when I am not allowed to process my pain internally, it gets externalized. Okay. So then, women, I think a lot of time have problems and men have trouble. So women are allowed to be in pain and men have trouble. Well, that's a perfect example of the externalization of an inner energy. There's one other big response to this. I love what people said about anger. I do a lot with men, and chronic anger is certainly an issue. The other thing we need to talk about is numbness. There is a super healthy physiological adaptation. If I am in pain and I am in pain and I am in pain and I am in pain, I am given no outlet to process that pain, the biology is going to do something very adaptive, which is shut down, numb it, cut it off at the knees. Now, wait for this. Now, I just had to cut off my own nervous system from myself. Now, you expect me to turn around as a boss and a leader and be soft to other people? Be relaxed to other people? Be patient with other people? You cannot get the math on this to work. So when we understand how nervous systems work, I just think it is so transformative. And we're in a moment right now, if I can say one more thing, it's like AI is racing. Okay. Well, I think this could be a gorgeous opportunity for humans to deepen their understanding and connection to human emotional intelligence like never before. And I am totally here for it.
Julia made such a great point about if I'm feeling this numbness and then you expect me as a boss to turn around and be soft to my people. And this is my interest in being on this panel and in this topic is as a CHRO, I see it played out in the workplace where you have employees, but more dangerously managers, executives, acting in that way. And so this is an organizational issue as well, a workplace issue. And so to your question about how do we raise awareness is encouraging, giving people the language to be able to identify it. But also we talked about, Julia mentioned anger and humiliation and pain. Let's also reinforce joy. So when men are feeling joy and happiness, reinforcing that and helping them name that so that they have more of that and can start naming things, because it becomes an organizational issue. That's how you have toxic workplaces and turnover and workplace violence. And so it's an organizational issue as well that costs the economy billions and billions of dollars.
Yeah. And I think there's another element to this, or another dimension, which is the difference between how you show up at home and with your friends and how you show up at work. Of course, there are people who show up terribly at home, and we're going to leave them aside for a moment, because I think most people show up pretty comfortably and relaxed with their friends, with their family. They've got some sense, men can express affection or kindness or softness with their family, with their children, with their friends. And yet they go into the work and they assume, oh, you got to leave all that behind because this is work. And I've got to show up strong and powerful and decisive and, whatever other kind of story they're telling.
Sorry, Ross, let me say something there. Would it be possible that that's the expectation that not only do we have about ourselves, but also everybody else has about ourselves? That kind person that you're at home here, I think there was a research a few years back saying that leaders who show themselves as empathetic and vulnerable thought of themselves as less effective than others that show themselves as more strong, as if a strong was not being empathetic, right? So I don't know, is it possible that maybe the expectations that we have with these men are creating those conditions?
Certainly, there's a challenge there around expectation, and I think there's an underlying belief that says strong or hard is effective, and soft is ineffective. But it actually doesn't have to be that way. And one of the areas that I really enjoy working with people is to find that ground where you can be kind to others. You can be compassionate. You can be soft, but you can have very high expectations and articulate them very clearly. Those things do not have to be opposites. They can actually happen at the same time. And so I think it's this notion of taking some of the characteristics of how you are at home, more fun, more easygoing, more relaxed, able to have joy, even able to relate to others, bringing some of that into the office, but recognizing it's not an either or thing. If you do that, it doesn't mean low performance. You can still have high standards, but you can do that with kindness.
There have been headlines in the last, few years about reporting that men are having fewer and fewer friendships and feeling lonelier. And so I'm curious for Rusty and for Julia, whether you've noticed whether a correlation between the number of friends men have, like real friends, not like just a drinking buddy, not that there's anything wrong with that, but you know what I mean, and their ability to be self-aware and be less toxic in the workplace.
I mean, I can't speak from any kind, I haven't looked at the studies. I can't speak from the statistical standpoint, but I can share my own personal experience with that, which is they're 100% correlated. My ability to form friendships, to talk about the challenges I have in life, my fears, uncertainties, all of that was really developed my ability, my own emotional awareness, my own self-awareness, and developed my ability to show up differently in the workplace, and led to the kind of work that I'm interested in now and I'm doing now. But it had to start with finding friends and developing those relationships, because it feels risky, right? Who's going to go start a conversation with someone about, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm failing at work. Like, you know, my boss is all over me, whatever, right? Or I have to do this big presentation and I'm terrified. Whatever the challenge is, it can feel risky to broach that subject with somebody. And, you know, I think that's this, you know, maybe one of the pieces we haven't really talked about here is vulnerability. That's really what vulnerability is. It's a willingness to recognize this is a risky thing, but I'm willing to do it because ultimately it's going to serve me. And you have to come to that belief in some way that this is going to serve you to develop the kind of relationship where you can talk about all of these emotions that are out of bounds for men. And if you believe that it will serve you and ultimately lead to a better life, then it's worth it.
Thank you, Rusty. Jolie, do you want to add something?
I mean, I thought Rusty gave a beautiful answer, and I think, you know, what I even heard him sort of say in there, and obviously jump in if I've misunderstood you, but I think he's really speaking to this idea that we will be isolated from other to the degree that we are isolated from self. And I think we overcomplicate this idea of relationships because we're not understanding how nervous systems are constructing reality. And part of that reality is our relationships. It's like, I will never be able to tolerate something to tell others that I am unwilling to tell myself. We are absolutely as sick as our secrets. Well, the reason I won't tell you what a loser I think I am, or how I'm like totally overwhelmed at work, or how I feel like I'm not measuring up, is because I don't really have the capacity yet to hold that inside of myself. I think it's disgusting. I think it's humiliating. So, you know, most of the problem with this, of course, though, is that most of our, and by most, I mean like 99% of our injuries happen in relationship. So that then means that our injuries get healed in the context of relationship. So this is just, you know, it's just, again, this neurobiology of what it means to be human. It's so stunning to me that we have created all of these sort of horror stories about culture and what's weakness and what's not. And it's like, no one's having these conversations about thirst or sleep. Or so I think if we could just walk it back to the machinery of the brain, I just think it gives everybody the space to be like, okay, let me just exhale here and think about what's going on. And I will tell you, so I do a lot of coaching with leaders, I do a lot of work with teams, and I also treat patients. When I wrote Energy Rising, here's a perfect example. When I wrote Energy Rising, there's a lot of like really powerful stories in there. I cannot tell you how many people like called, like we're joking, but they're my clients, and they're like, so basically you wrote this entire book about me. So multiple people are saying this, which just speaks to the point that like the human experience, of course there's variability, but the idea of wrestling with our own sense of worthiness is literally as fundamental as it gets to be a human being. So why this is a deep, dark secret that we're all then engineering all these layers of defense and entanglement and dysfunction, this is one of life's great mysteries.
Where I'm going to ask you the last question, and I want to begin with you, Julia, and as we get ready to wrap up our conversation, but where does that all end, and where does a new beginning begins, right? Or begin, because it seems that we are again entangling this circle of, you know, expectations, more defensiveness, and if somebody brings up an issue that seems to be related to toxic masculinity, we get defensive, and then we actually, instead of just like letting it go, we actually double down on the same behavior just to protect ourselves, because otherwise we feel humiliated, like you said before. Where does that all end? And how do we build the new? How do we build more vulnerability? How do we allow ourselves to feel more? How do we understand that there are more emotions than just love and anger? So where's the inflection point? And how do we accelerate getting to that inflection point so that we leave behind what's not working and we start embracing the new, which hopefully will work?
Yeah, well, the great news here is that we know how nervous systems change, and I don't just mean like the neuropsychologists and neuroscientists amongst us. I mean, it's very simple. So we know how to strengthen a muscle. We go to the gym, or we go for a walk, and we hold more physical resistance. It is precisely the same on the emotional power side. And when I say emotional power, I want to be very clear. I mean, I am talking about the fullness of what we actually are. I think the most powerful way to live is in alignment with reality. So it is not, and this is why people are now talking about this idea of toxic positivity. It's like, well, it's toxic because it's like, you know what it should just be? It should just be day all day long. Like night should not, it's like, okay, good. Like I had a colleague who would used to say shit in one hand and wish in the other and watch which one fills up first. It's like, okay, so we are human beings. We're wired to have various experiences. Some of them are more uncomfortable inside of the body. Well, if I want to be able to hold more, if I want to increase my capacity for emotional power, for leadership, then I just need to do this in a very hierarchical way. If I can lift 5 pounds at the gym today, maybe next week I lift 10, maybe the next week I lift 12. So I would ask myself, okay, I'm struggling. Maybe I don't want to go to my boss and tell my boss I'm struggling, because that would be like a level 10 on a scale 1 through 10. Maybe I could call an old college friend. Maybe I could write a blog post. Maybe I could tell a trusted colleague. In other words, I sort of figure out in a very systematic way, what is the level of emotional resistance I need to approach? And I will tell you this, when people do this intelligently, it happens so fast, and it happens, I don't want to say effortlessly, but it is far, far more easy and pleasant than most people imagine.
Yeah. Well, the same way that lifting 5 pounds would be easier at the beginning of your journey than lifting the 12 pounds or 15 pounds or whatever it is. So you begin that systematic approach with your body, why not with your emotions and your mind, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'd love to add just one piece on that. I love that systematic approach of building the muscle. The other part of it is the motivational part. Oh, I got a little thumbs up. Look at that.
I
know. Which is, why do you want to build the muscle? And I think that there are two things to consider. I mean, one is just like the really big picture, which is the Harvard longitudinal study that's been going on for like 60 or 70 years, tracing people through multiple generations, very conclusively states that the number one predictor of happiness in life is relationship. So if you want to have a good life in the big picture, it's worth investing in relationship. But I think also what Julia was saying is back to the more specific kind of shorter term things. If you want to grow as a leader, if you want to get to the next level, if you want to be more effective, more successful as a leader, you need to be able to handle yourself in challenging and new difficult situations. And so that's another reason to go to the gym and start learning how to have these conversations, to deal with some of these uncertainty and build your emotional power.
Thank you, Rusty. And we'll wrap up with you, Angela.
Oh, they said everything that I wanted to say. I was like, oh, I should have gone first. Really, I'll just say one thing, that it needs to start at the individual level. So the family and in the schools with our children, our nephews, and it needs to continue at the organizational level to help them through and say, this is not acceptable. And here are some tools to help you, because what you're doing is not serving you. It's not serving the organization. It's not serving anyone.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I can't believe that this was half an hour. I mean, too short. Rusty, Angela, Julia, thank you so much for being part of this incredible conversation. This was fantastic. I'm going to let you go now so that I can welcome our next 25-minute panel, which will probably end up being half an hour too. So you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here. I'm letting you go now. And I'm going to be welcoming the last panel of this series, Movember, an urgent call to action for men's mental health. And the last panel of this event and the last conversation we're going to have today is about creating mindful workspaces and nurturing men's mental health in the workplace. So if everybody in the panel, in the backstage is ready, I'm going to bring you to the screen right now. Hello, everybody. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So excited to have this conversation with all of you. I'm going to ask you a favor. If you can have your microphones muted when you are not speaking, that will help us manage any background noise. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. As I have said since yesterday and today, it's been quite a mistake on my part to do this just for 25 minutes per panel, because we've had some truly incredible conversations and pretty much only covered like 2 or 3 questions in each of the panels. But hey, let's make sure that those 2 or 3 questions generate a good amount of insights for, number one, to encourage men to understand that being vulnerable, seeking help, and feeling emotions is a human thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's no weakness in it. And number two, to also provide some insights and ideas and practical practical insights that can help our community to create better workplaces. So let's begin here for the pretty much two questions that we're going to have time to cover today. But I'm going to ask you to please introduce yourselves. Just quickly let us know about you. And I'm going to just ask you one question to kick this off. How do we create in a very practical way? Tell us one or two things you think all of us can do, not just HR, not just leaders, all of us can do in the workplace to create more mindful workspaces where men can come forward and say whatever it is they want to say about mental health. So very direct question with a couple of practical insights together with your introduction, and then we're off to a wonderful start. So anybody, please just unmute yourself and we begin from there clockwise. Just go ahead. Anybody? Well, let's go. I'm going to go with my screen then. Sheila, I'm going to go with you then. You're the first on my screen. You got the lottery ticket then.
Okay, I'll be right back. I got to go buy the lottery ticket now. My name is Sheila Kruger. I am the former head of global benefits for Zoom Video Communications, and I am based in Phoenix, where it's finally beautiful instead of an oven. And I guess for me, when I think about mental health and men, that stigma seems almost insurmountable. And I was just sitting in on your last session, Enrique, and you hit so many great points there about, men have been trained from birth to have that attitude of, let's suck it up and man up and blah, 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 blah. So really and truly, for me, one of the things that I think I saw work best at Zoom was modeling behavior from our senior leaders and having those leaders come forward and say, even as simple as I'm taking a vacation, I need a week off. I am truly going to be incommunicado, and you will not be able to find me for a week because I need the time to have a mental break. And even something as simple as that can be really, really a big thing to other people in the organization. And especially if you're in a real boom situation, and this is something that occurred at Zoom during the pandemic. And of course, we tripled in size. Everybody was busy. Nobody took a day off. It was just really, really crazy. And so to have this senior leader come out in front of his team and then again at an all hands and say, here's what I'm doing. I got to do this. And having the CEO say, I'm taking a week off. I'll be traveling. I'm going to spend time with my family, and just having those role models that are in really, really great positions saying it's okay to take the time. It's okay to have that conversation about needing a break. And I mean, starting with the little stuff, it's just the little drips of water that have to happen because that's how we build up that stigma, right? Just one little comment at a time from the time you were a child. And then as an adult, the only way to get rid of it is one thing at a time. You just have to provide the modeling. Yeah.
Thank you, Sheila. There's a lot I appreciate the one drop at a time because there's a lot to unlearn. Given the way most of us men are raised, so there's a lot to unlearn, and it can feel humiliating to say that there have been things that are not right, that they were actually wrong, and we can get in a real defensive mode pretty quickly. So those drops really work. So thank you, Sheila. Alex, we go with you now.
Great. So I'm Alex Seiler. Most recently was Chief People Officer for a company called GHJ. And then I'm also a startup advisor currently to 3 people tech startups. And this topic is important to me on a personal and a professional level. So I'd say, to answer your question, Enrique, something we did at GHJ that they continue to do, that we instituted while I was there, was first of all create a wellness week once a year where people could take time off to really focus on things like burnout, or anything else they may be coping with. So that was one thing where everyone shut down. And obviously that was not just for men, but I think in general was something to say, use this time so you can really reset. I double down on Sheila's point, but maybe go a step further, is really encourage leaders to, when something is happening in their life, to actually share that with other employees, because it creates that level of vulnerability, and it also opens up the conversation for other people to step forward and talk about those things as well. And then the other thing I've done with my team is, if something's happening in, again, modeling the right behaviors happening with me, for example, share that with them so they understand how it's affecting me professionally, right? And I'll give you a real example. My mom passed away a few weeks ago, and she's been ill for 11 or 12 years, and I realized the mental health toll that had placed on me over the years. And so I've taken a sabbatical over the last couple of months, because I realized I needed to take care of myself in order to take care of others in the future. So, but I was very honest about what I was dealing with my team. So they knew that I may be showing up differently on certain days, depending on what I was dealing with. So I think it's very important to be transparent and relatable. And it helps other men feel like they can come forward and start breaking that stigma as well.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for sharing your own story. We talked about this before, and of course, our love to you for
thank you,
for all you've gone through, especially recently. So thank you for sharing that. Felicia, we move on next to you. You're muted, by the way, just in case.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Felicia. I'm the founder for CPO Playbook and also podcast host. CPO Playbook is a leadership and HR consultancy, so I do a lot of CPO fractional work. I think one thing, and to your point, Enrique, you kind of mentioned, humans, or not just companies, and like, what can we do? And I think, honestly, just bringing more women into the cause, I think, would be really helpful. And, when we talk about men's health, men's health is not just their own, they're not like in a bubble. I think that it's a much bigger ecosystem of where that support should be coming from. And women, wives, sisters, mothers, daughters should really have that awareness in order to provide the support system for men. I think would be a really, really helpful way of being able to build that support for them. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Felicia. I appreciate that. And it actually makes me think not only of support, but also of expectations, right?
Right.
There's a thing in there. I mean, we have some expectations about ourselves, men, that if we by any chance struggle or can't find an answer to something, we get really frustrated, and it feels humiliating to have the answers to something. I mean, it feels deeply humiliating because, again, we've been raised, and the tape is on our minds of, you got to figure it out, you have to have all the answers, and if you don't ask people, you just do it yourself. But that expectation is reinforced by both men and women. And I love that you're bringing up the role of women in men's mental health, specifically around support. And I would also add that re-engineering of expectations to make them human and not unnatural for anybody, in this case for men. So thank you for that, Felicia.
Exactly. Yeah. And just on that note, it's a lot of self-awareness that women also need to have to understand their impact on the mentality of the men around them. Yeah. So it's really everyone that needs to be involved, I think. Yeah. But yeah, to your point, what you had just shared.
Thank you. I appreciate that. David, we go with you.
Hey, everyone. I'm Dave Greenwood. I've authored 2 books. First was Overcoming Distractions, about adults with ADHD. And then my second book was a little bit of shedding light personally, Overcoming Burnout. And I work privately one-on-one with busy executives that have ADHD, people who have burnout, and sometimes both together. So, but I think I would just add to this that in both cases, burnout and adult ADHD, many people are fighting this kind of private battle that they don't want to, bring a level of attention to. And I think it's up to leadership to just understand that when maybe we see certain signs or performance issues, or maybe employees being late for work or missing deadlines or procrastinating, that there may be some type of kind of deeper issue. So before we get into maybe disciplinary action, that we maybe just hit the pause button and try to kind of figure out what's going on. Obviously, ADHD is classified as a disability. It's something that somebody would need to publicly disclose to you. So I know there's issues around HR and legal and what have you, but I think we just need to hit the pause button and kind of understand that people are fighting these private battles and actually dealing with some shame in the process.
Thank you, David. And thank you for bringing for talking about the shame that goes along, the struggles, right? And they are present and evident in both men and women. And I think they, of course, not just I think, but there's science showing that they carry a very different weight on men. Again, given the cultural expectations that we have created around how men should behave or be or how they should respond to challenging situations. So thank you so much for that. And last in this first round of the only two rounds that we're probably going to have, given the time that we have available today, Rod, please go ahead. What is it, like 1 a.m. for you or 2 a.m. or something like that?
Oh, no, not too bad today. Although I did wake up. It's 4:30 a.m. So it's not too bad.
Okay, not that bad.
All right. For me, so I'm Rod Hutchings. I'm a director at Kyndryl. I'm a personnel manager in the Air Force Reserve, and also relevantly I'm an executive committee for one of our major veteran organisations in Australia, and I thought all the answers so far have been really good, and I think that what I think, and I have so that professional experience and also had personal family issues around men's mental health. The thing I'll add on to that, and maybe I think really, I think what we've heard about is really, empathy is really key to men's mental health, and then the real secret sauce then with that is really about listening. And when you're really noticing something, sometimes with maybe men in particular, is you really need to keep asking the next question. It's really a key thing, I think, is really listen to hear and just ask questions. And if you think that something's a bit off kilter, just keep asking in a non-inclusive way. But that's really important. I think particularly with this day and age of being virtual as well, it's very easy to hide sometimes. And it's very easy to put things on social media that might make things look like they're better than they are. So really try and tune into that would be my addition to what's been said so far.
Thank you, Rod. I appreciate that. Well, welcome all to this conversation, and probably again we're going to have time to cover a couple of questions. But let me ask you this next one: how do we create? And this is a very general question and very, very large, given the way most workplaces are designed. But how can we create workplaces that are more mindful about the impact of relationships at work, the impact of work itself on people's mental health, and particularly men's mental health? How can we redesign the way they are, the way jobs are created, the responsibilities that people have, the way leaders relate to others and managers relate to others, so that these workplaces are now more conducive to creating the conditions for mental health and not the conditions for destroying mental health? And I know this is a continuum and it's a large one, given that it's only a very recent thing that in workplaces, we started talking about mental health, and it may be as recent as the pandemic, actually. So there may be a lot of things to dismantle and a lot of things to rebuild to make sure that those workplaces focus on people's mental health, and particularly men's mental health. But where do we begin? How do we redesign workplaces to be able to do that? So if you can maybe share some practical ideas of what you've seen works, or what you would want to see happening in workplaces. So please just go ahead and mute yourself. And this is an open round for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think just piggybacking off of what Rod was sharing around empathy, there aren't many men that are, or people in the workplace that are just going to, put on a platter all of the things that are bothering them at home or outside of work or whatnot. And so if people are not just shouting out their challenges, I think it's really important to lead with empathy. And so when we do leadership training, manager training, any type of leadership training, whether it be managers or executives or whatnot, it's leading inclusively, leading with empathy. If someone is not performing at your expectations, it's not, why aren't you performing, the right way or whatnot. It's really leading with, hey, what's going on with your work? How can I help? And I think that is a very different tone and a very different way of leading people who may be going through those challenges. I think just assuming you don't know what you don't know as a leader, and you don't have to know everything, but what you do need to do is figure out, how do I unblock this person, or how do I support them? And coming from that space, I think, is where I see a lot of successful leadership.
Yeah. Thank you, Felicia. Anybody else?
Yeah, I so agree with you, Felicia. I think so much of this lies with leaders within the organization. I think they're not well trained on how to lead with empathy, on how to ferret out an issue like that. And I just had to laugh because I looked up and there's my Hacking HR page that I printed from LinkedIn about from how are you to I genuinely care about you. And it's about the questions you're asking. If you say, how are you? I think for a lot of people, that's just, you're expecting them to say, I'm great, everything's fine, moving on. But I mean, the questions that Hacking HR generated for that poster are just, it was just eye-opening to me. It's like, these are really very great questions that you can use with your employees. And it's almost like when you're learning something new, you just have to keep asking why, how, when, ask the questions and really be tuned into that person as you're speaking with them to find out what's going on and help them, be the partner beside them as they go down this road, as opposed to the person that's pushing them, because that's going to feel not great to them either.
What's interesting, Sheila, is that sometimes we see that asking of relevant questions and deep questions as a distraction of the work of a manager, when in reality is the work of the manager. That's part of what they are supposed to do. And alternatively, actually simultaneously, what we see also is managers thinking that by being empathetic, by being vulnerable, by caring for others in that human way, they become less effective as managers, rather than the opposite, when it's the opposite was true. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because it unveils a lot of stereotypes and paradigms about what good leadership and good managing truly mean. Alex, I know you were going to go next, and then David.
Yeah, I was just first of all, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I'd add, Felicia was kind of alluding to this, but removing one's ego is really important as part of this. And I think on top of empathy, being relatable, part of like sharing your story helps others share their own. I also think that you want to create an environment where you're not viewed as performative, right? So we talk about, I've worked in environments, for example, that obviously, claim that they're very diverse in nature, but really their actions don't necessarily speak to that. So I would say the same thing in this matter. If you're seeing themes around mental health issues, what are you going to do about it so people feel supported versus fearing any sort of repercussions for sharing? And I think that's how the narrative needs to change.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. David, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing a theme here, and I completely agree. Is the empathy, because I don't think that every leader understands what people are bringing into the workplace. Alex, you mentioned your mother. Caregiving is a huge and exhausting responsibility for many. I have a son with special needs. I have a 91-year-old father. Rod, he's a retired Air Force colonel, so he's a little stubborn. so you can kind of see what people may be already bringing into the workplace. They may be tired before they even get to your office in the morning. So I think we need to understand that there are many elements in people's lives that they do need to take care of, such as caregiving and other things. It's not just workload and maybe unrealistic demands on managers, that a manager is giving somebody for their time. There's a lot of things that are already coming into the workplace that contribute to these feelings.
Thank you, David. Rod, I think you wanted to add something. Probably
Yeah,
a response to the stubbornness of the...
I'm not calling Rod stubborn.
No,
I know.
I'll add a practical thing. So most of my workforce was still working virtually. What I try to do consistently is when I schedule a meeting, I normally try and allow like the first 10 minutes just to chat. Like normally when you're in the workplace physically, you sort of chat and you have coffee and things like that. So I think sometimes still in this virtual world, we need to just allow time just to talk. Don't just get straight into the agenda. Let's just check in with each other and just allow 10 minutes of just chit chat. And then you can then tune into something if there's how someone is feeling, in that little conversation, and maybe follow up with them separately. But that's just a little practical thing that I like to do.
Thank you. And it's amazing how much you can get out of those 5 or 10 minutes, right? I mean, nobody's going to tell you in those 5 or 10 minutes, I'm struggling, I need help, I am going through whatever, but you can at least read some of the signs. And that already gives you a lot of information that if you were just talking about work, you wouldn't get otherwise. So thank you for bringing that up, Rod. And we have like 2 minutes left in the panel. Again, this was so short. I'm so sorry that I planned this to be so short, and it should have been literally each panel like a day, of the conversations, given how complex these topics are. But I want to repeat something that I have said in the previous conversations in this event, which is I truly believe in the power of one, and I specifically believe in the power of thinking big and acting small. And what I mean by that is we may dream about having a whole better world and a more beautiful world, better workplaces where the culture allows people to be vulnerable and to come forward when they are struggling. But we may not have the power to create that kind of world. We may not have the power to create those kinds of workplaces as a whole. But we can change the way we interact with one person. And maybe that is one life that we're changing for the better and for the more positive. So my question to you is, at that individual level, people that are dreaming right now or thinking, I want my workplace to be one where men can come forward with their own mental health struggles and find help and find support and find a community that cheers them on and up. What can people do at an individual level to create more mindful workplaces? So one or two things that they can do individually, whether they have power, whether they are leaders, it doesn't matter if they are in HR or not. One or two things that they can do to act small towards the creation of better workplaces. So please just go ahead and then we take it from there.
I can start.
Alex, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've always, there's different words for this, but I've created in the past what I call my own personal board of advisors or directors who've who I can, share things with, both about what's going on in my life and professionally. And they're people that I found in my professional life that we realized we had things in common. And I find that in moments of difficulty or hardship, those are people that you can really lean on. And so I recommend to people to try and create your own personal board of directors. I also think we need to be careful of also, as much as we want to create strong male communities, going back to Felicia's point at the beginning, we also want to leverage women as allies. And one example of that that's been on my mind is also like physical health affects your mental health and vice versa, right? And so one thing that women and men have in common is hormones and hormone levels and hormone issues. We hear more and more about low testosterone, menopause, things in the workplace. I think there's an opportunity to have a very open joint conversation about things like this versus separating people. And so I'd say just find your people, find your community. I'm lucky when it comes to mental health issues. I have a nice mixture of men and women, but it's down to who you feel comfortable. And again, I think Dave said this before, not every leader is built with empathy. So if you find your community that does have that sense of empathy, really lean into them.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. I'm going to move clockwise from here. So Felicia, I'm going to go next with you in this last quick round of answers.
Yeah, so I think being able to understand and call out the signs when people feel like someone's mental health, whether it be men or women, but in this case, particularly men, are in need of extra support. And so some of those signs are like, procrastination or substance abuse. If you know if that person is using, increased anxiety, communication issues, lack of engagement, these are all, if you put them all in a big pot and you're seeing them over and over for long periods of time, there's probably, somebody needs a little bit extra support. So just being able to call out the signs and recognize them and be able to step in and see if that person needs extra support.
Thank you, Felicia. I appreciate that. David?
I mean, I'll talk burnout for a second. Enrique, you and we had our conversation back a couple of months ago, and we talked about how we were kind of co-founders of our burnout. I mean, there's responsibility in the workplace. There's habits that we bring into the workplace. But I think the more that leaders can create that safe space where people can speak up and address their concerns, the much better. Because there's one thing, I work with people one-on-one, and I tell them that they need to be in control. They can't let their days and weeks and months run them and always be in response mode. They need to take control. And the only way they're going to take control is if they have a little bit of safety. So,
yeah. Thank you. Thank you, David. Rod?
Just that maybe join like mentorship, peer support mechanisms. It doesn't always need to be about the leader and the employee. So, support each other, as men in your organization, and many organizations, do have mentor programs. Look at that as well.
Thank you. And last but not least, Sheila?
Awesome. First of all, you are all on my board of directors as of right now. It's so wonderful to have a conversation with people who really understand what an issue mental health and stigma is, and especially for men. I think one thing for me is that we just always need to hold up accessing mental health as a positive and not a negative. We need to support those people that are confiding in us and telling us that they're getting assistance, and make sure we continue to check in on them, make sure that we're assisting them in any way we can that makes sense, and just be supportive. That whole empathetic thing isn't just weaseling out the problem. It's making sure that there's follow-up and helping them get back to where they want to be. So I think that's a really important piece too, the follow-up.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Sheila, Alex, Felicia, David, Rod, thank you so much for being part of this incredible conversation. I appreciate it. Too short of a time for the panel, and everybody who's been connected online. Thank you so much for being part of all these conversations that we've had about men's mental health. I am hoping that you feel empowered. If you're a man and you're struggling and you want to seek out help, it's okay. It's okay to be vulnerable. There's nothing wrong with you. It's not a weakness. It's a sign of being a human. And I encourage you to seek help if you need help, to be part of a community, and to reach out if that's what you need at the moment. And for everybody else, of course, if you act on this and just start small in your workplace, you're going to make a huge difference, even if it's just in that one person's life. So thank you so much, everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And if you're in the US, happy Thanksgiving week. I will see you all soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.